The dining room was too bright for what my father was about to say. Morning sun hit the glass table in sharp angles, turning every reflection into something that could cut. His voice came out steady, practiced, the tone he used when announcing decisions he considered final. "You're cut off until you apologize to her," he said. A fork froze halfway between plate and mouth. His mistress, Serena, sat across from me, legs crossed, face soft with a pitying smile she absolutely did not feel. She tilted her head just slightly, pretending to look wounded, but the tiny spark of triumph she couldn't fully hide was the truth. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand fairness. I just said, "Okay." If my father had known what that word would unleash, he might have swallowed every syllable before it reached the air between us. I grew up in a house where competence was supposed to mean security. It took me years to understand it actually meant servitude. Serena learned that early. She cried once during an investor dinner she wasn't invited to, and my father rewrote the company roster before the first course was cleared. She left with a new department and a manufactured title. I left with a longer task list and the reminder to be the helpful one. Helpful became my identity before I knew I'd accepted it. I remember the morning I closed the Kimura deal, 6 months of negotiations, 3 countries, a contract worth more than my father had earned in his best year. I set the signed documents on his desk with hands that had barely slept. He skimmed the first page, nodded once, and set it down beside his coffee cup like it was a receipt for dry cleaning. He didn't even read the terms. Serena walked in 10 minutes later with fabric swatches for the office she wanted redecorated, and suddenly the room filled with laughter and promises. My contract disappeared beneath a pile of color samples before lunch. That was the first time I realized contribution meant less than performance. After my mother passed, the imbalance sharpened. She had been the quiet witness, the one who noticed when my jaw tightened or when I stayed at the office until the cleaners arrived. When the house lost her clarity, it also lost the only person who kept my father's delusions from consuming everything else. Serena didn't change. She simply had less resistance. In the family business, the pattern repeated itself with cleaner lines and higher stakes. I built the operations infrastructure from a chaotic mess of spreadsheets into a system clients praised by name. I knew every vendor relationship we'd cultivated, every deadline we delivered early, every crisis I'd diffused at 2 a.m. I didn't advertise it. The work spoke for itself. Serena, on the other hand, mastered the art of promising things she didn't comprehend. 3-week turnarounds when the work required 3 months. Budgets that ignored legal fees, quality control, or the actual humans required to execute her vision. My father always backed her. "She understands people," he insisted. "Just make it work." So I did. Days blurred into weeks. My team absorbed the chaos, eyes strained under fluorescent lights that never seemed warm enough. I absorbed the impossible, rewriting timelines, covering gaps, shouldering blame she handed off with a practiced sigh. My father never asked how we managed. He only repeated what he'd always said: "Serena handles relationships. You handle the rest." I didn't argue. I documented everything. It became my quiet insurance: emails, budgets, meeting transcripts, evidence no one wanted to acknowledge. The ultimatum at breakfast told me what I had refused to admit. Serena had overstepped again. My father had protected her again. When I pointed out the consequences, he looked at me the same way he did when I was 12, asking why my achievements went unnoticed, patient, dismissive, certain I would reshape myself to fit whatever form he needed. Sitting at that too bright table, I realized something simple and sharp. I had spent a lifetime being reasonable for people who never intended to value me at all. That was the moment I accepted my place in this family. And the moment I quietly began to leave it. The hallway outside the dining room felt longer than it should have. I walked through it without looking back, my footsteps the only sound in a house that had never felt like home. No one followed. No one called my name. No one even seemed to breathe. I reached my car and sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, staring at nothing, feeling everything. My phone buzzed. A message from my assistant: emergency meeting called for 9 a.m. Your presence requested. Another buzz. From the company lawyer, we need to discuss your portfolio responsibilities. Then another. Are you okay? People are talking. I turned the phone face down and let it vibrate silently against the leather seat. My father called 6 minutes later. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked if I'd thought this through. His voice carried that same careful tone he used when I was 14 and tried to tell him Serena had taken credit for my work. Patient. Dismissive. Certain I would adjust myself to accommodate his version of reality. Just fix this, he said. Family comes first. Family. The word had never sounded hollower. I learned how to read a balance sheet before I learned how to drive. Not because I asked to. Because my father needed someone to double-check the quarterly reports, and my mother was too emotional about money. I was 15. He handed me a stack of ledgers and said, "You're good with numbers. Make sure everything adds up." It always did. And when it didn't, I fixed it quietly, circling discrepancies in pencil so he could present the corrections as his own observations. That became the pattern. I did the work. He took the credit. And everyone pretended that was how it was supposed to be. By 17, I was sitting in on client meetings, taking notes my father would later recite as if they were his insights. By 19, I was negotiating vendor contracts while my classmates were negotiating curfews. By 22, I had a business degree and an unspoken understanding that my life's trajectory had already been decided. I would hold the company together. He would take the applause. And then Serena arrived. She appeared at a charity gala my father attended alone. My mother had stayed home with a migraine that turned out to be something far worse, though we didn't know it yet. Serena wore red. She laughed too loudly. She touched his arm when she spoke and held eye contact a beat too long. 3 weeks later, she was having coffee with him at the office. 6 weeks later, she had a title, Director of Client Relations. She had never worked in client relations. She had worked in event planning for a hotel chain, and not particularly successfully, based on the gaps in her resume. But she had something my father valued more than experience, the ability to make him feel interesting. She brings fresh energy, he announced at a staff meeting, Serena perched beside him like a prize he'd won. She's going to help us think differently about relationship building. I watched from the back of the room as my colleagues exchanged glances. Fresh energy. It was the kind of phrase people used when they couldn't cite actual qualifications. My mother was in treatment by then, quiet about it, dignified as always, refusing to let her illness become spectacle. She pulled me aside one evening, her hand thin and cold in mine. "Watch him," she said. "He's good at convincing himself. Don't let him convince you." I didn't understand then. I thought she meant the business. She meant everything. Serena's first project was the Langford account, a mid-sized manufacturing client we'd worked with for 8 years. Stable. Predictable. Profitable. She decided they needed innovation. Without consulting anyone, she promised them a custom logistics platform we didn't have the infrastructure to build. She quoted a timeline of 6 weeks. The actual development time? 4 months. Minimum. I found out when the client called me directly, confused about specifications Serena had described that didn't match our capabilities. She said you'd have the beta ready by next month, the client said, his tone caught between hope and suspicion. I felt my jaw tighten. "Let me look into that and get back to you." I went to my father's office. Serena was already there, sitting in the chair I usually occupied during strategy meetings. "There's a problem with the Langford timeline," I said. My father waved a hand. "Serena's handling it. She promised something we can't deliver in the time frame she gave." Serena's eyes widened, practiced, perfect. "I was just trying to show them we're ambitious. That we think big. Thinking big and lying are different things." The words came out harder than I intended. My father's face shifted. "That's enough. Serena's trying to grow the relationship. You're being rigid. Rigid. The word he used when I insisted on reality. If we don't deliver, we lose them, I said evenly. Then make sure we deliver, he said. That's what you're good at. I made sure we delivered. My team and I worked 70-hour weeks. We outsourced pieces we shouldn't have needed to outsource. We cut corners that made me nauseous. We delivered a functional product in 8 weeks that should have taken 16, and it cost us twice what we'd budgeted. Langford was thrilled. My father praised Serena's vision at the next board meeting. I sat in the back with my laptop, documenting every email, every revised timeline, every cost overrun. Not because I planned to use it. Because I needed proof I wasn't imagining the insanity. That became my second job, record keeper of a reality no one else wanted to acknowledge. The pattern repeated with horrifying consistency. Serena would promise. My father would approve. I would fix. She told the Hendricks Group we could integrate their entire supply chain system in 3 weeks. I spent a month and a half rebuilding code from scratch while my lead developer seriously considered quitting. She assured the Morrison family we could deliver a custom analytics dashboard by the end of the month, without clarifying which month. I spent Christmas Eve on a conference call with a data engineer in Singapore. She scheduled a product demo for investors before the product existed. I had a prototype built in 4 days using duct tape, prayer, and a developer who I later gave a raise he didn't ask for but absolutely deserved. Every time, my father called it entrepreneurial spirit. Every time, I called it negligence. Every time, I fixed it anyway. My mother died on a Tuesday. The office closed for 3 days. We held a small service. She had requested small, hating the idea of spectacle even in death. Serena attended in black she'd clearly just purchased, tags still tucked discreetly inside the neckline. She cried elegantly. She hugged my father with the kind of tenderness that made people whisper, "At least he has someone." I stood beside the grave with dry eyes and a throat that felt sealed shut, watching a woman who barely knew my mother perform grief better than I could express it. At the reception, Serena held court. She told stories about my mother that were too vague to be real, filled with phrases like, "she always said," and, "her spirit was so bright." My mother's actual friends stood in corners, uncomfortable, unsure how to navigate this. I left early. No one noticed. After the funeral, my father leaned on Serena more. Or maybe he had always been leaning, and my mother's presence had just obscured it. Within 6 months, Serena had her own office. Her own assistant. Her own operating budget that she treated like a suggestion rather than a limit. Within a year, she was attending board meetings. Within 2, my father was introducing her as essential to our strategic vision. I was introduced as my daughter, who keeps operations running. Operations. The unsexy part. The part no one toasted at company dinners. I built the systems that kept us afloat. I created the project management workflows that turned chaos into predictability. I established vendor relationships that saved us 30% on supply costs. I implemented the client feedback loops that caught problems before they became disasters. I knew every contract's renewal date. Every employee's skill set. Every project's risk factor. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because someone had to, and no one else was going to. But somewhere along the way, my competence became their assumption. My father stopped asking if I could handle something. He just expected it. Serena stopped apologizing for her mistakes. She just expected me to fix them. The board stopped questioning decisions. They just expected I'd make them work. I became infrastructure. Invisible until something broke. The Mitchell account was the breaking point I didn't recognize as a breaking point. Serena promised them a full rebrand package, logo, website, marketing materials, brand guidelines, in 4 weeks. The scope of work she described would normally take 3 months with a dedicated team. We didn't have a dedicated team. We had a graphic designer who worked part-time and a marketing coordinator who was already drowning. When I saw the proposal, I went straight to my father's office. "This isn't possible," I said, sliding the document across his desk. He didn't look up. "Serena already got them to sign." "Then Serena needs to unsign them or reset expectations. She's building relationships. You're breaking them before they start. I'm trying to prevent us from breaking a contract we can't fulfill." He finally met my eyes. "Why are you always so negative about her ideas?" The question hit like a slap. "I'm not negative. I'm realistic." "You're threatened," he said. Not unkindly. Almost gently. Like he was explaining something to a child. "She's good at things you're not. That doesn't make your contributions less valuable." I stared at him. At this man I'd spent my entire life trying to impress, trying to help, trying to prove myself to. He actually believed what he was saying. He thought my objections were jealousy. He thought my standards were insecurity. He thought competence and charm were equivalent currencies, and Serena's happened to be more appealing. "I'll make it work," I said quietly. His face relaxed. "I knew you would." I made it work. I always made it work. But that night, sitting alone in my apartment with lukewarm coffee and a migraine that felt like it was splitting my skull, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it, Documentation. And I started compiling everything. Every email where Serena promised the impossible. Every budget she'd blown through. Every timeline she'd shattered. Every client complaint that had been redirected to me. Every project I'd salvaged at the cost of my team's sanity and my own health. Not because I was planning anything. Because I needed to know I wasn't crazy. I needed proof that this wasn't normal. That I wasn't the problem. That the exhaustion crushing my chest at 2 a.m. wasn't a personal failure, it was the inevitable result of carrying weight that was never meant to be mine alone. The morning my father issued his ultimatum, I wasn't surprised. I was tired. Serena had overstepped again, this time publicly, at a client dinner, making promises about a product line we discontinued. When I corrected her in front of the client, she'd looked at me with those wide, wounded eyes and excused herself to the restroom. My father received 3 texts before dessert arrived. By breakfast the next morning, I was the villain. "You humiliated her," he said. "I corrected a factual error that would have cost us the account. You made her look incompetent. She made herself look incompetent. I just prevented it from becoming a legal issue." His jaw tightened. "You've been hostile to her from the beginning. I've been honest with you from the beginning." Same thing, apparently. The silence stretched. Then he said it. The ultimatum. The line in the sand. And I said, okay. Because the truth was, I'd been preparing for this moment for years. Every ignored achievement. Every dismissed concern. Every time I'd fixed a crisis she'd created and watched him thank her for trying something bold. The ultimatum wasn't the cause of my departure. It was just the confirmation. I would never be valued here. Not for what I built. Not for what I saved. Not for what I sacrificed. I would only ever be useful. And usefulness without recognition is just exploitation with better lighting. I didn't know it then, sitting in my car with my phone buzzing and my father's hollow words about family still echoing in my ears. But I had been preparing to leave for years. One ignored warning at a time. I arrived at the office at 6:17 a.m. The building felt different in the early morning silence, colder, sharper, like seeing a familiar face without its usual expression. The lobby lights hummed with a frequency I'd never noticed before. My footsteps echoed against marble that suddenly seemed too polished, too reflective, too honest. The security guard nodded at me. Same nod as always. But this time I wondered if he saw it, the shift. The invisible line I'd already crossed in my mind. I took the elevator alone, watching the floor numbers climb with a strange detachment. 3rd floor. 5th. 7th. Each number a measure of height I'd helped build and never been credited for. The doors opened to darkness. I didn't turn on the main lights. Just my office lamp, casting a small circle of clarity in an ocean of shadow. The hallway stretched behind me, empty and waiting. In a few hours, it would fill with voices, with the performance of productivity, with people who had learned not to ask me how I was because the answer might require them to care. But for now, it was just me and the truth I'd been collecting in silence. I sat at my desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. It slid smoothly, almost eager, like it had been waiting for this moment too. Inside, 4 years of evidence organized into labeled folders. Color-coded. Cross-referenced. Dated. Serena, budget overruns. Serena, client misrepresentations. Serena, timeline failures. Serena, contractual liabilities. Project rescues, documentation. Each folder was a story my father had refused to hear. Each document was a conversation he'd cut short with phrases like, "You're being too hard on her," or, "Just make it work." I'd made it work. And I'd documented every single instance of exactly how. Not out of spite. Out of survival. Because when you're gaslit consistently enough, you start to question your own memory. You start to wonder if maybe you are too rigid, too negative, too threatened. The folders were my sanity check. Proof that I wasn't imagining the pattern. Proof that competence wasn't the same as compliance. Proof that I had been holding everything together while everyone else took credit for the stability. I pulled out the first folder and began to read. March 14th, Serena promises Westfield Corp a custom integration platform. No technical consult. No feasibility assessment. Timeline, 3 weeks. Actual requirement, 12 weeks minimum. Result, I pulled 2 developers off other projects, negotiated overtime nobody wanted, delivered in 7 weeks at 140% over budget. Client retained. Serena praised for innovative thinking. June 2nd. Serena approves marketing materials with incorrect product specifications. Materials printed and distributed before anyone in product development sees them. Result, I personally called 47 clients to clarify the error, repositioned the mistake as preliminary concepts, prevented 3 contract cancellations. Serena told the board she was testing bold messaging. September 19th, Serena schedules product demo for investors. Product doesn't exist yet. Demo in 6 days. Result, I built a functional prototype using borrowed code and a UI designer who worked 96 hours straight. Demo successful. Investors impressed. Serena credited with visionary leadership. Designer quit 2 weeks later. Page after page. Month after month. Year after year. A pattern so clear it was almost mathematical. Serena promised. Father approved. I delivered. She succeeded. My role in the equation was invisible by design. I opened my laptop and created a new document. The cursor blinked in the white space, patient and undemanding. I titled it, Operational Accountability Review and Project Impact Summary. Sterile. Professional. Unthreatening. The kind of title that would get opened out of curiosity or obligation, not alarm. Then I began to write. Not with emotion. Not with accusations. Not with the anger that had been building in my chest like pressure in a sealed container. Just facts. This document provides a comprehensive review of project outcomes, budget adherence, and operational decision-making across key accounts from 2021 to 2025. The purpose is to ensure accurate attribution of work performed and to identify patterns affecting company sustainability and client retention. I listed every project Serena had touched. I outlined every promise she'd made and every reality I'd delivered. I included timelines, hers versus actual. Budgets, proposed versus final. Client feedback, initial versus after my intervention. I cross-referenced emails. Attached meeting notes. Cited specific dates, times, and decisions. No commentary. No interpretation. No emotional appeals. Just the gap between what she claimed and what actually happened. And in every instance, buried in every board member. Every senior partner. Every key client who had worked with both Serena and me. The company lawyer. The head of HR. The external auditor we'd hired last year for compliance review. People who had the authority to act. People who had the responsibility to know. People who had been operating on incomplete information because my father controlled the narrative. I attached the PDF. I wrote a brief email. Attached, please find operational documentation compiled over the past 4 years. This review was created to ensure accuracy in project attribution and to provide transparency regarding decision-making processes that have impacted budget, timeline, and client satisfaction metrics. This information is being shared in conjunction with my formal resignation from all roles within the company, effective immediately. For questions regarding specific projects or documentation, please refer to the cited sources included in the appendices. Professional regards. My name. Clean. Factual. Devastating. My finger hovered over the send button. This was the moment. The irreversible choice. Once I sent this, there was no pretending it was a misunderstanding. No walking it back. No smoothing it over. This was the truth, delivered in a format that couldn't be dismissed as emotional or exaggerated or misunderstood. This was accountability, handed to people who had been insulated from it. This was the end of my usefulness and the beginning of my freedom. I clicked send. The email disappeared from my outbox with a soft whoosh. 47 copies, flying through digital space to land in inboxes that would open them over coffee, between meetings, during the morning routine of checking messages before the day officially began. I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly. Then I pulled out a fresh document and began writing my resignation letter. This one was even shorter. Effective immediately, I am resigning from my position and all associated responsibilities within the company. I have provided comprehensive operational documentation to relevant stakeholders to ensure continuity and transparency. I will not be available for transition meetings or exit interviews. My decision is final. 2 paragraphs. 38 words. A scalpel cut, not a sword swing. I saved it, printed it, signed it. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I placed it in an envelope with my father's name on it and set it in the center of my desk. Then I began packing my belongings. My office had never felt personal. I'd kept it deliberately neutral, professional boundaries extended even to decoration. But there were still pieces of me scattered across the space. The framed photo of my mother, taken a month before her diagnosis. Her smile genuine, her eyes clear. The small glass paperweight a vendor had given me after I'd saved a contract Serena had nearly destroyed. To the person who actually gets things done, the note had said. The coffee mug my team had gifted me last Christmas with World's Most Patient Project Manager printed on the side. They'd meant it affectionately. It had felt like an epitaph. I packed them carefully into a box that had held printer paper. My computer I left open, logged in, every file accessible. I wasn't hiding anything. I wasn't taking anything that wasn't mine. I was simply removing myself from a structure that had been built on my labor and held together by my silence. At 8:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. An email notification. Then another. Then another. The replies were starting. I didn't open them. At 8:51, my phone began to ring. A board member. Then a senior partner. Then another. I let each call go to voicemail. At 8:56, the office line rang. My assistant's extension, then my father's, then the main conference room. The sound cascaded through the empty hallways like an alarm system detecting a breach. I kept packing. At 9:02, I heard the elevator chime. Voices in the hallway, urgent, confused, overlapping. My father's office door opened and slammed shut. Someone said my name. Then said it again, louder. Footsteps approached my office, hesitated, retreated. The building was waking up to a reality it hadn't expected. At 9:15, the company lawyer appeared in my doorway. He looked at the box on my desk, the empty walls, the resignation letter in its envelope. "They're asking for you in the conference room," he said quietly. "I'm sure they are. This documentation you sent is accurate," I interrupted. "Every piece of it. Dated, sourced, verifiable." He cleared his throat. "There are questions about your intentions. My intentions are stated clearly in my resignation letter. Your father wants to speak with you. My father had years to speak with me. He chose not to listen." The lawyer shifted his weight. "This is going to create significant complications." "I know," I said. "That's not my problem anymore." He studied me for a long moment, and I saw the shift in his expression, from corporate protection mode to something almost like respect. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "some of us noticed. We just didn't know the extent." I nodded once. An acknowledgement, not an absolution. He left. At 9:28, my phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 unread emails. I turned off the notifications. At 9:30, I picked up my box and walked toward the elevator. The hallway had filled with people pretending not to watch. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes tracked me without making contact. I didn't say goodbye. Didn't offer explanations. Didn't perform the exit they might have expected. I just walked. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. As they slid closed, I caught a glimpse of Serena emerging from my father's office, her face pale, her movements sharp with panic. She saw me. Our eyes met for half a second. I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Didn't give her anything at all. The doors sealed shut. By the time the office filled with footsteps and whispers, accusations and emergency meetings, lawyers drafting responses and board members demanding explanations, the match had already been lit. And I was already gone. I made it to the parking garage before my phone rang for the 19th time. This time, it wasn't a board member or a senior partner. It was the company lawyer again. I almost didn't answer. But something in the persistence, the specific rhythm of call, pause, call again, suggested this wasn't a request anymore. "They're invoking the executive emergency clause," he said without preamble. "You're required to attend." I resigned. "I'm no longer an executive. Your resignation hasn't been processed yet. Technically, for the next 72 hours, you're still bound by the operating agreement you drafted." Clever. I'd written that clause myself 3 years ago to prevent executives from abandoning ship during crises without transition protocols. I'd never imagined I'd be the one trapped by it. Conference room. 10 minutes, he said. If you don't show, they'll claim you abandoned your fiduciary duties and contest your severance terms. I closed my eyes. Even my escape route had been built with chains I'd forged myself. "I'll be there," I said. The conference room was on the 8th floor, the executive level, all glass walls and power positioning. I could see them before the elevator doors even opened. My father stood at the head of the table, hands braced against the surface like he was holding it down. Or holding himself up. Serena sat 3 chairs away, her posture rigid, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The company lawyer occupied the corner seat, laptop open, face professionally neutral. 3 senior executives filled the remaining chairs, Davidson from operations, Chen from finance, Martina from business development. All of them looked up when I entered. The air felt vacuum-sealed, thick with blame and fear and questions no one knew how to ask. I set my box down by the door and walked to the table. No one spoke. I remained standing. "You asked me to be here," I said. "I'm here." My father found his voice first. It came out rougher than usual, scraped raw by whatever the last 40 minutes had contained. "What the hell were you thinking? Not are you okay?" Not can we talk about this. Just anger, dressed up as authority. I was thinking clearly, I said. For the first time in years. You sent confidential operational details to the entire board without authorization. I sent accurate operational details to stakeholders who have a legal right to that information. You blindsided us. No, I interrupted, my voice level. I documented what you refused to see. There's a difference. Davidson cleared his throat. The material you sent raises serious questions about project management protocols and budget oversight. Then you should ask those questions, I said. Of the person who created the problems, not the person who fixed them. Serena spoke for the first time, her voice trembling with what might have been fear or might have been rage. You're trying to destroy me. I turned to look at her fully. No, Serena. You did that yourself. I just stopped cleaning it up. My father slammed his palm against the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Enough. This ends now. You're going to retract that documentation, apologize to the board for the confusion, and we're going to move forward professionally. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope containing my resignation letter. The paper whispered as I slid it across the polished surface. It stopped directly in front of my father. Everyone froze. Chen's eyes widened. Martina inhaled sharply. The lawyer's fingers stilled on his keyboard. My father stared at the envelope like it was a live explosive. What is this? My formal resignation. Effective immediately. You can't, he stopped himself, recalculating. We can discuss your concerns. We can address any issues you feel have been overlooked. This isn't a negotiation, I said quietly. I'm done. Serena pushed back from the table, her chair scraping harshly. She's bluffing. She needs this job. She needs you. I didn't even look at her. My father picked up the envelope with hands that shook slightly. He opened it. Read the 2 paragraphs. Read them again. The color drained from his face. You can't leave, he said, and for the first time, the authority was completely gone. Only desperation remained. The company needs you. I need you. You needed a fixer, I corrected. Not a daughter. And I'm not interested in that role anymore. The lawyer spoke next, his voice carefully controlled. Your resignation triggers several contractual obligations. Severance terms. Non-compete clauses. Equity vesting schedules that you, he paused, checking his screen. That you structured yourself. I'm aware. You built protections into your own contract that essentially make you untouchable, he continued, a note of something almost like admiration creeping into his professional tone. The company can't contest your departure without triggering penalty clauses that would cost more than your entire severance package. My father's head snapped toward the lawyer. What? She amended her executive agreement 2 years ago. You approved it. The lawyer turned his laptop around, showing a signature page. My father's signature, dated and notarized. You signed off on terms that give her complete resignation autonomy with full benefits protection. I had done it quietly, buried in a stack of contract updates after Serena's 3rd major budget disaster. My father had been too distracted to read the fine print. He'd trusted I would never use it. He'd been wrong. Davidson spoke carefully. The documentation she distributed, if even half of what's cited is accurate, we have serious liability issues. Client misrepresentations. Budget violations. Projects delivered under false pretenses. It's all accurate, I said. Every detail is sourced. Every claim is verifiable. I kept copies of everything. Chen turned to Serena. Is this true? Did you promise Westfield Corp a platform we couldn't build? Serena's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. I was trying to think big. Did you or didn't you? The timeline was aggressive, but... Yes or no? Serena's face flushed. I made a strategic decision to push the team. You made a promise we couldn't keep, I said flatly. I spent 7 weeks and $60,000 over budget making sure we didn't lose the client. You took credit for innovative thinking. The board gave you a performance bonus. The lawyer was typing rapidly now, his expression growing grimmer with each keystroke. How many projects followed this pattern? Martina asked quietly. I pulled a single sheet from my bag, a summary page I'd printed that morning. I slid it across the table. Martina picked it up. Her eyes scanned the list. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She passed it to Chen. Chen's jaw tightened. He passed it to Davidson. Davidson set it down slowly and looked at my father with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. 17 projects, Davidson said. 17 instances of misrepresented timelines, inflated promises, and budget overruns. All attributed to. He checked the page. Director of Client Relations. Every eye turned to Serena. She stood abruptly, her chair toppling backward. This is a setup. She's been planning this for months. She's trying to sabotage me because she's jealous. Jealous of what? I asked calmly. Your title? Your office? Your complete lack of accountability? You've hated me from the beginning. I've documented you from the beginning. There's a difference. You can't prove any of this. I opened the folder I'd brought with me, a physical copy of the digital packet I'd sent. I placed it on the table. The lawyer reached for it first. He opened it. Started reading. His face went pale. This is. He flipped pages. Stopped. Read more carefully. This is comprehensive. Email timestamps. Budget approvals. Project timelines. Client communications. Meeting transcripts. He looked at Serena. She can prove all of it. Serena's voice went shrill. She's lying, she's manipulating the data. These are your emails, the lawyer said, turning the folder toward her. Your signature on these budget approvals. Your promises in these client meetings. I was doing what he told me to do, she pointed at my father. He said to think big. He said to be ambitious. He said not to worry about the details. My father flinched. I never told you to lie to clients, he said quietly. You told me to make them excited. You told me to show vision. Vision isn't fraud, Serena. Her face crumpled. Not with sadness. With panic. You're going to let her destroy me? After everything I've done for you? After everything we. She stopped herself, but too late. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Chin shifted uncomfortably. Martina's expression hardened. My father closed his eyes. This is going to require a full audit, the lawyer said quietly. Board investigation. Possibly external review depending on what we find. She should be suspended immediately, Davidson said. Pending investigation. Serena spun toward my father. Are you going to let them do this to me? He didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. She made a sound, half sob, half scream. This is your fault, she said, her voice breaking. You told me I was doing great. You told me I was essential. You told me. I told you what I wanted to believe, my father said, his voice hollow. That doesn't make it true. He turned to me then, his eyes searching mine for something I no longer had to give. We can fix this, he said. Come back. Help us sort through this mess. We'll restructure. We'll establish oversight. We'll. No. The word landed like a door slamming shut. Please, he said, and the word was so unfamiliar in his mouth it sounded foreign. I'm asking you. As your father. You're asking me as someone who needs a fixer, I said. But you stopped being my father the moment you chose her over the truth. Over and over again. His face cracked. For a moment, I saw something that might have been regret. But regret without change is just performance. I made mistakes, he said. Yes. You did. I can't do this without you. You'll have to. I picked up my box. The lawyer spoke one last time. For the record, your resignation is legally sound. Your severance terms are enforceable. And based on this documentation. He tapped the folder. You've protected yourself from any liability related to these projects. Everything here shows you operating as a corrective force, not a participant in misrepresentation. I nodded once. Serena's voice rose behind me, frantic and sharp. You can't just leave, you can't just destroy everything and walk away. I turned at the doorway. Watch me. My father called my name. Once. Then again, louder, with a note of desperation I'd never heard before. But I was already walking. Down the hallway. Past the offices where people pretended not to stare. Into the elevator that would carry me away from a life I'd built for people who'd never valued the builder. As the doors began to close, I heard Serena's voice crack into something raw and uncontrolled. She was screaming. Blaming. Melting down. And for the first time in my life, I didn't stop to help. Serena arrived at the office at 8:47 a.m., 17 minutes later than usual. She'd spent the previous evening drafting texts to my father that she'd deleted before sending, rehearsing explanations that sounded less like excuses, trying to convince herself that the confrontation had been an aberration, a temporary storm that would pass once cooler heads prevailed. She'd chosen her outfit carefully that morning, the navy suit that made her look authoritative, the heels that added 3 inches of confidence, the jewelry that suggested success without ostentation. She walked into the building expecting damage control. She found something else entirely. The security guard stopped her at the lobby desk. Ms. Reeves, I need to see your credentials. She laughed, a bright, dismissive sound. Tom, you see me every day. New protocol. ID badge, please. She pulled it from her bag, still smiling, still certain this was procedural theater. He scanned it. The system beeped. Red light. There's a problem with your access, he said, his voice carefully neutral. What kind of problem? You'll need to speak with HR 8th floor. Her smile faltered. I have meetings this morning. 8th floor, Ms. Reeves. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. She checked her phone. 3 emails from the board. 2 from the lawyer. 1 from HR with the subject line, immediate attendance required. Her hand started to shake. The doors opened to the 8th floor, and she knew immediately that something fundamental had shifted. The usual morning energy, conversations by the coffee station, laughter from corner offices, the ambient hum of productivity, was gone. Instead, silence. Stares. Whispers that stopped when she walked past. Martina from business development stood in the hallway, phone pressed to her ear. She saw Serena and turned away mid-sentence. Davidson emerged from a conference room, spotted her, and retreated back inside without acknowledgement. Serena's heartbeat accelerated. She reached her office and tried her keycard. Red light. Access denied. Through the glass door, she could see her desk, exactly as she'd left it yesterday. Her nameplate still visible. Her coffee mug still sitting beside her keyboard. But the door wouldn't open. Ms. Reeves? She turned. An HR representative she barely knew stood behind her, holding a tablet and wearing an expression of professional sympathy that felt worse than outright hostility. I'm Jennifer from HR. If you could come with me, please. What's happening? Why can't I access my office? Conference room B. This way. Conference room B was smaller than the executive suite. No windows. No glass walls. Just a table, 6 chairs, and 3 people waiting. The company lawyer. An external compliance officer she'd never seen before. And the head of the board's ethics committee, a stern woman named Patricia Zhou who had always intimidated Serena even in passing. "Please sit," Patricia said. Serena remained standing. "I'd like to know what this is about." "We'll explain once you sit." The authority in her voice left no room for negotiation. Serena sat. Patricia slid a folder across the table, a thinner version of the documentation I'd distributed, but clearly extracted from the same source. "We've been reviewing operational records related to your role as Director of Client Relations," Patricia began. "Specifically, projects you initiated or managed between 2021 and 2025. Serena's throat tightened. "I can explain any discrepancies." "We're not asking you to explain yet. We're informing you of the investigation process." The lawyer leaned forward. "As of 7 a.m. this morning, you've been placed on administrative leave pending a full audit of the projects listed in this summary." Serena's vision blurred at the edges. "Administrative leave? I haven't done anything wrong." "That's what the investigation will determine," Patricia said crisply. "Until it's complete, your access to company systems has been suspended. Your signature authority has been revoked. Your direct reports have been temporarily reassigned. You can't do this." "We can. We are. And we're legally obligated to, given the nature of the allegations." "What allegations?" Serena's voice pitched higher. "I haven't been accused of anything." The compliance officer spoke for the first time. "Misrepresentation to clients. Budget overruns without authorization. Project commitments made without technical feasibility assessment. Repeated pattern of promises that required emergency intervention to fulfill." Each phrase landed like a physical blow. "Those weren't misrepresentations," Serena said desperately. "I was being ambitious. I was thinking strategically. Did you promise Westfield Corporation a platform integration in 3 weeks when the actual timeline was 12 weeks minimum?" Silence. "Did you approve marketing materials with incorrect product specifications that were distributed before technical review?" Serena's hands clenched in her lap. "Did you schedule an investor demo for..." They had the emails, the approvals, the evidence. And without me there to fix the narrative, the truth looked exactly like what it was, a pattern of reckless incompetence enabled by favoritism and cleaned up by someone who'd finally stopped cleaning. "Where is he?" Serena asked finally, her voice small. "Where's?" She stopped herself from saying his name. "In this room, with these people." He wasn't her protector. He was the CEO under scrutiny. "Mr. Aldrich is meeting with the full board," the lawyer said. "Separately." The implication was clear, she was on her own. 2 floors above, in the executive boardroom, my father was learning the same lesson. He sat at the head of a table he'd commanded for 20 years, facing 9 board members whose expressions ranged from disappointment to barely concealed anger. "Walk us through your oversight process," Patricia Zhou said. She'd come directly from Serena's meeting, her patience already depleted. "How did 17 projects reach critical failure points without your intervention?" My father's carefully prepared talking points dissolved in his mouth. "I trusted my team." "You trusted one person on your team," Davidson interrupted. "Against the documented objections of your most competent executive. My daughter was resistant to change." "Your daughter," Chen cut in, voice sharp, "has a documented track record of delivered projects, satisfied clients, and budgets that came in under projection. Ms. Reeves has the opposite. Why did you consistently override competence in favor of charm?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. My father opened his mouth. Closed it. Because there was no good answer. The truth, that Serena made him feel vital, interesting, desired in ways his capable daughter never had, wasn't something he could say in this room. The board lawyer pulled up a presentation on the screen. "This is a timeline of every intervention your daughter made to correct Ms. Reeves' errors," he said. "Note the escalating pattern. Note the increasing financial impact. Note the repeated warnings that were documented and ignored. Slide after slide. Project after project. My invisible labor made suddenly, brutally visible. Why wasn't this brought to the board's attention? Patricia demanded. I thought we could handle it internally. You thought you could hide it, she corrected. There's a difference. Another board member, Marcus, who'd been with the company since its founding, spoke quietly. The documentation your daughter provided is the most comprehensive operational review I've seen in 30 years. She didn't just identify problems. She built an entire accountability framework that we should have had in place years ago. My father flinched. Where is she now? Patricia asked. I don't know. You don't know where your daughter is? She's not answering my calls. Have you tried her emergency contact? Her residence? She's made it clear she doesn't want contact. Patricia's expression hardened. Then you've lost the only person in this company who had complete operational visibility. Do you understand the exposure that creates? My father's face had gone gray. The lawyer says we're protected. We're protected legally, the board lawyer interjected. Because she structured her own departure to shield the company from liability. She could have burned everything down. She chose not to. But that doesn't mean we're not facing significant consequences. He pulled up another slide. 3 major clients have already requested clarification meetings. 2 have asked specifically for her. 1 has indicated they may review their contract terms if they can't work with her directly. My father's hands gripped the table edge. We'll assign new account managers. They don't want account managers. They want the person who actually delivered results. Silence. Marcus leaned back in his chair. You built this company on your vision. But she made it sustainable. And you chose someone who flattered your ego over someone who protected your legacy. The words landed like a eulogy. By noon, Serena was escorted from the building. No box of belongings. No farewell. Just a security guard walking her to her car while colleagues watched through office windows. She called my father 17 times. He didn't answer. He was still in the boardroom, listening to Patricia outline the investigation timeline, the potential legal exposure, the reputational damage already spreading through industry channels. We need crisis management, someone said. We need her back, someone else replied. Everyone turned to my father. He sat silent, finally understanding what I'd known for years. The empire he'd built had been held together by someone he'd taken entirely for granted. And now she was gone. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, I sat in my home office surrounded by boxes. Books I'd never had time to read. Frames I'd never bothered to hang. A life I'd put on hold while I held someone else's together. My phone sat face down on the desk, notifications silenced. I knew what was happening. I could feel the implosion from here, a structure collapsing under weight it had never learned to carry on its own. Part of me wanted to check. To see the messages. To know the extent of the chaos. But a larger part, the part that had finally chosen myself, didn't need to know. Their crisis wasn't my emergency anymore. At 2 p.m., I had a video call with a recruiter from a tech firm in Austin. Your reputation precedes you, she said, smiling. We've had 3 separate clients mention your name in the last 6 months. When word got out you were available, we had to move fast. Available. Such a simple word for such a complicated freedom. Tell me about the role, I said. She outlined it, Director of Operations. Real authority. Real team. Real respect. No one's mistress to manage. No one's chaos to clean. No invisible labor. Just competence, valued. The VP wants to meet you in person, the recruiter continued. But between us? The job's yours if you want it. They've already prepared an offer. I felt something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Not relief. Not vindication. Just possibility. Send me the details, I said. I'm interested. After the call, I stood at my window, looking out at a neighborhood I'd barely noticed during all those years of early mornings and late nights. Trees I'd never watched change seasons. Neighbors I'd never met. A life that had waited patiently while I spent myself on people who'd never intended to value the investment. My phone buzzed again. Another call from my father. I didn't reach for it. By evening, the full scope of the collapse was clear. Serena had been suspended indefinitely. The board had initiated a formal investigation. 3 clients had requested transition meetings. 2 senior executives had quietly started updating their resumes. My father sat alone in his office as the sun set, staring at a framed photo from the company's 10th anniversary. He stood in the center, smiling broadly. My mother beside him, elegant and proud. And me, slightly off to the side, not quite in focus. He'd never noticed that before. How I was always in the frame but never centered. Always present but never prioritized. Always holding things together from just outside the spotlight. He picked up his phone one more time. Dialed my number. It rang. And rang. And rang. Nothing elaborate. Just pasta and vegetables and wine I actually tasted instead of drinking for fortification. I ate slowly. In silence. Without checking my phone every 5 minutes for emergencies that were no longer mine to solve. And somewhere across the city, in offices and conference rooms and behind closed doors, they were learning what I'd always known. A structure built on invisible labor collapses the moment that labor withdraws. They were unraveling without me. They were panicking without me. They were facing consequences I'd spent years preventing. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel responsible for the ruins. The Austin office sat on the 14th floor of a building made mostly of glass and intention. Light poured in from every angle, not harsh like the dining room that morning, but warm, deliberate, designed to make people feel seen rather than exposed. I arrived 15 minutes early for my first day. Not out of anxiety. Out of choice. The VP of operations, a woman named Karen Westfield who'd built her career on systems thinking and refused to apologize for her competence, met me in the lobby herself. I don't usually do first-day greetings, she said, shaking my hand with a grip that felt like an equal meeting an equal. But I wanted to make sure you knew from minute one, we brought you here because of what you can do, not what you can fix for someone else. Something in my chest loosened. I appreciate that, I said. She smiled. Come on. Let me show you your actual office. Not a desk. Not a corner. An office with a door that closes and a window that opens. The onboarding was different. They asked for my input. They listened when I flagged potential issues. They adjusted timelines when I explained why their original projections were unrealistic, not with defensiveness or dismissal, but with appreciation for the expertise. This is exactly why we hired you, the project lead said during my first strategy meeting. We need someone who sees the gaps before they become craters. No one called me negative. No one suggested I was being rigid. No one implied that my standards were a personality flaw. They just valued the skill. In the afternoon, I joined a client call where a deadline had been promised without technical consult, the exact pattern I'd spent years managing. I felt my shoulders tense automatically, the old instinct to smooth it over, to promise a miracle, to absorb the impossible and deliver it through sheer force of will. But before I could speak, Karen cut in. I'm going to stop you there, she said to the client, her tone professional but firm. We don't make commitments without feasibility assessment. Let me get our technical lead on this call, and we'll give you an accurate timeline within 24 hours. The client paused. Then, that's actually really refreshing. Thank you. After the call ended, Karen turned to me. You looked like you were about to promise them the moon. Old habit, I admitted. Break it here, she said. We don't reward heroics that shouldn't be necessary in the first place. 3 weeks in, I had my first one-on-one performance check-in. I arrived with a mental list of accomplishments, prepared to justify my value, ready to prove I deserved the space I occupied. Karen looked at my notes and laughed, not mockingly, but with recognition. You don't have to earn your place here every single day, she said. We hired you because you're excellent. Now just be excellent. That's enough. Just be excellent. Not be excellent and invisible. Not be excellent despite being overlooked. Not be excellent while someone else takes credit. Just be excellent. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes and blinked them back quickly. Karen noticed anyway. It's okay, she said quietly. A lot of people cry in their first month here. Usually because they've never worked somewhere that treated competence like it mattered more than performance. It's just different, I managed. It's what normal should be, she corrected. You've just been operating in dysfunction for so long you forgot what functional looks like. That evening, I walked through my neighborhood for the first time without my phone in my hand, without checking emails, without waiting for the next emergency that required my immediate intervention. I noticed things I'd never seen before. The coffee shop on the corner with the handwritten menu in the window. The small park where neighbors walked dogs and children played on equipment that looked well loved. The bookstore I'd passed 100 times but never entered because I'd never had time to read for pleasure. I went inside. The owner looked up from behind the counter, smiled, and said, "Let me know if you need recommendations." Not "Can I help you?" Not "Are you finding everything okay?" Just an offer. No pressure. I browsed the fiction section, stories about other people's lives, other people's choices, other people's transformations. I picked up 3 books. At the register, the owner noticed one of the titles. That one's incredible. Devastating but hopeful. About someone learning they deserve better than what they settled for. I smiled. Sounds familiar. A month after I left, my father tried one more time to reach me. Not with a call. With a letter. It arrived at my apartment, forwarded from my old address, the one I'd already started packing up to leave behind entirely. I stared at his handwriting on the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside, 2 pages. Handwritten. His script smaller and less confident than I remembered. I don't expect you to respond to this. I just need to say it. I was wrong. Not just about the ultimatum. About everything. I thought Serena brought energy to the company. But you brought stability. I thought her charm was an asset. But your competence was the foundation. I thought I was building something together with her. But you were the one holding it all together while I convinced myself otherwise. The board has removed me from day-to-day operations. Serena's contract was terminated. The company is being restructured under new leadership. Everything you predicted would happen has happened. I lost you because I took you for granted. I lost the company because I valued the wrong things. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can. But I need you to know, you were right. About all of it. I'm sorry. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not because I was saving it for sentimentality. Because I needed a reminder of what happens when people finally see you only after you're gone. I didn't write back. Some apologies come too late to change anything. They can only acknowledge what was lost. And I wasn't interested in litigating the past anymore. 2 months in, I had lunch with a colleague, a systems architect named Marcus, who reminded me of the best version of who I used to be before I learned to make myself small. "You're different than I expected," he said. "How so?" "I heard you came from a family business." "I figured you'd be." "I don't know." Overly cautious. Hesitant to speak up. I smiled. "That's who I was there. It's not who I am here." "What changed?" I thought about it. About the dining room. About the ultimatum. About the single word that had felt like surrender but had actually been a beginning. I stopped waiting for permission to value myself, I said. That night, I stood in my new apartment, smaller than the old one, but entirely mine. No furniture my father had purchased. No artwork Serena had chosen. No remnants of a life I'd lived for other people's approval. Just space. Empty and waiting for me to fill it with choices I actually wanted. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the floor by the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my father was navigating consequences I'd spent years preventing. Somewhere out there, Serena was probably blaming everyone but herself. Somewhere out there, the company was learning to function without the invisible architecture I'd built. And here, I was learning something I'd never been allowed to learn before. My worth wasn't measured by how much I could carry for other people. It was inherent. It existed whether anyone acknowledged it or not. I thought about my mother sometimes. How she'd warned me. How she'd seen what I couldn't yet see. How she'd died before I learned the lesson she'd tried to teach. But I think she'd be proud of me now. Not because I'd destroyed anything. But because I'd finally chosen myself. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, clearly, completely. 3 months in, I stopped checking my old work email. 4 months in, I stopped wondering what was happening in that conference room, that office, that building made of glass and favoritism. 5 months in, I forgot to think about it at all. Because I'd built something new. Not a company. Not a role. Not a performance. Just a life. One where my competence was valued. Where my boundaries were respected. Where my voice mattered not because I'd earned the right to be heard, but because I'd always had it. I wasn't the fixer anymore. I wasn't the invisible one. I wasn't the daughter waiting to be seen. I was just myself. And that was finally, completely, enough. On a Sunday morning 6 months after I walked out, I sat in that coffee shop I discovered. Sunlight filtered through the windows, warm, gentle, nothing harsh about it. I had a book open in front of me. Good coffee. No agenda. No emergency. No one needing me to solve problems they'd created. My phone buzzed once. A text from Karen, great work on the Morrison project. Taking the team out Friday to celebrate. You made that happen. Not we made it happen. Not the team made it happen. You. Acknowledged. Credited. Valued. I smiled and set the phone down. Some doors close with shouting, slammed in anger, rattling the frame, leaving echoes that linger for years. Others close with drama, tearful goodbyes, regretful speeches, promises to stay in touch that everyone knows are lies. Mine closed with a single word. Okay. Not surrender. Not submission. Not defeat. Just clarity. The recognition that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop fighting for a place that was never meant to hold you. I didn't leave a family that morning in the too bright dining room. I left a role I'd never chosen. A script I'd never written. A performance I'd given for people who mistook my endurance for consent. I left the weight of being essential to people who treated me as optional. And I found something I'd never had before. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from running away. The kind that comes from walking towards something better. Toward respect. Toward reciprocity. Toward a life where my value wasn't conditional on my usefulness. The coffee shop owner caught my eye and smiled. I smiled back. The book in front of me waited patiently. The sun continued to pour through the window. And somewhere in the distance, in offices I no longer entered and meetings I no longer attended, they were still learning to function without me. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about the presentation I'd give on Tuesday. The new system I was designing. The team I was building. The life I was finally, fully living. Some doors close quietly. Mine closed with a single word. Okay. And for the first time, it meant freedom.